cost of a bad network connection. I'm speaking with Shari Christofferson. She's president of Connect. Hi, Shari.
Hi, Bob. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining me. Shari, talk to me about the importance of having a connected network in warehouse and distribution. For that matter, what that network consists of.
Sure. Well, it's of primary importance, and it's always been that way. As soon as people started connecting mobile computers or printers to a wireless network, connecting to remote host applications, it became the only thing that mattered. Is that can this thing connect to the application I want to talk to put the box in the truck or move it to another part of the manufacturing plant? And when it doesn't, what you have in your hand or what you've bought is a paperweight or a hunk of junk sitting in your warehouse.
Mm-hmm. Also been described to me as a brick. So,
Yes.
but you've got all these mobile devices, all these elements that maybe weren't there before. So obviously this connection is so many different nodes. But what I want to get into, though, is the cost of having a bad network connection. Now, as I understand it, such costs, they fall into maybe three distinct categories. You've got direct costs, indirect costs, and opportunity costs. Let's start with direct costs. What are we talking about when we use that term?
Yeah, and I'll even step back and say, what does bad mean? Bad,
Okay.
right? Bad is intermittently failing. And it doesn't have to be a complete outage, and that's the thing. This is about poor performance. And the first place it affects, and probably the thing most people want to talk about right away, is that big direct cost. What is happening? Labor. Obviously, if you've got a warehouse full of 50 people, you got a manufacturing floor, and you're trying to use that device to scan a barcode, move it to the next part of the process, and people are waiting, and they're waiting more than a few seconds, sometimes a minute. And it's not every time, but it's almost every time. You just need to do the math, right? How much are you paying people to stand there and wait? And those minutes and seconds add up. And now you've produced less widgets at the end of the day or the end of the year, or you've loaded fewer packages on the truck to go out for delivery. And now you're not invoicing your customer for that. So
Mhm.
that's a real hardcore cost.
Yeah. Well, you've got increased labor, and you also are addressing another aspect of human labor, and that is productivity. So productivity is being reduced at the same time.
Absolutely. And then if we take one step back from that, there's a group of people and things that maybe it's not people, maybe they're tools and things monitoring this that have been invested in.
Mhm.
Primarily people, though, that are having to respond and want to be able to assist the folks on the front line or the robots on the front line and keep them moving, but their hands are a little tied. Sometimes those intermittent connections, they're not captured properly. And if you can't capture that problem, if you're not aware of it, it's very difficult to address it.
Yeah.
So it definitely takes another step back into IT support costs and resource allocation, Bob.
So you got both the technology aspect and the human aspect as well, both racking up costs in the warehouse and distribution center because your connections are lousy. Okay. What about indirect costs? There's a whole slew of those as well. Is there not? Talk about some of those.
Yes, I mean, indirect costs are vast, right? With it's circling back to labor, with labor out as a premium, you can imagine that, retention. How do you retain people who aren't able to do their job? How do you hire people to come into the business when they're not going to have the tools they need? And that's true on the IT side too. You're going to task people to come in and provide an infrastructure for automation, an infrastructure, and they end up not being able to carry that out in the way that benefits the business. So you're really tying a lot of things together. Another big one is, what about on the output, right? So we know from industry research that nearly 100% of supply chain businesses do have delays getting things out the door, and they're due to technology. Now, it may not be a connection. And when I
Mhm.
say connection, I don't necessarily mean the network. What I mean is something's not communicating to get the job done in the technical infrastructure. So that
Mhm.
ends up going out the door, inside the four walls, And then obviously going out to the customer is maybe considered indirect, that you're not able to deliver.
Yeah. I
Like,
mean, even though, as you say, all supply chains do face some degree of disruption, if you have enough of them, it's certainly going to cut into your reputation and your dependability, both regarding to your partners in the supply chain and your customers. So that's got to be a big deal too, right?
I mean, people like to talk about next day delivery, right? We're getting used to that, but it doesn't have to be that in your face or on the nose, right? It
Yeah.
can just be that you know, over time you've promised to do something for even your own vendors or even, you know, people selling your product. And if
Hmm.
it doesn't get there like you told them, it's really crushing, and it requires um, a lot of other things you have to do to compensate for that.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just better to have some visibility into how the technology is connecting and how it's being used minute by minute, so you don't get this death by a thousand cuts, right?
Hmm.
It's like I said, it's one thing when you have a big you know, your car breaks down is one thing, but when it won't start on a cold day and then it miraculously starts and then you're in a parking lot, you know, that's that feeling of death by a thousand cuts. Something needs to be fixed. It's not necessarily identifiable. And that's really, I think, the main problem.
Hmm. Okay.
Characterizing it, but then understanding where to go.
All right, then finally, this idea of opportunity costs, they are the most intangible to measure, and yet in the long run, they may be the most important of all. What kind of opportunity costs do you incur from a bad network connection?
Yeah, I'm going to take this in a direction of strategy. Um, if you're moving your business, like many are right now, to digital transformation, you're automating Industry 4.0. Your opportunity to grow in that and add more to it, you want to take that network that may have bad connections, you're not sure, and then you're going to put more robots, you're going to add automation machines, because you're trying to do more with your business with less cost. So the opportunity is really, how can you expand if you don't really know where you're at in terms of connections that are there now?
Mhm.
So I
So,
think that's a
yeah,
big
so,
one.
but lost revenue, lost future revenue, it's hard to put a finger on what doesn't happen. But certainly that's going forward a big concern.
Yeah, and that's, I think that's one of the problems I have with the standard ROI thought, right? That opportunity cost doesn't always get put on the piece of paper when someone says, we want to improve, and they, you know, you end up with this issue of, well, what am I improving? I'm not seeing something. Well, you have to think into the future and what is being degraded for your initiatives.
Right, right.
And that future loss revenue is definitely something.
Shari, why though is it so difficult for companies to understand the degrading effect of bad connections to the business?
That is the big question. And it's, first of all, it's technology advancement. What's available to me? How do I know it's available to me as a technology leader of a supply chain company? I have to go out and find what new innovations are there. And the part of it is the siloed nature. I have an IT team, I have network, server, compute, edge, and they're not always coming together because there's often not a unifying data set that helps them understand the cumulative effect of them not having visibility throughout. So I would say silos is one of the bigger challenges across technology and the supply chain.
Well, thank you, Shari, for those insights into the cost of a bad network connection and maybe some ways in which companies can address it through technology. I really appreciate those insights. But I want to just take a quick moment to ask you about Connect itself, your company. Tell me where you folks fit into the picture and what kind of services do you provide with regard to what we've been speaking about here?
Yeah, I would say, from first and foremost, the title there, the cost of a bad connection. First, we can help companies evaluate the bad connections en masse. We can break down those silos with the right level of visibility, capturing what the front line is really feeling, and then tying that to the whole infrastructure, so that then when you deliver that information, when we bring that to the supply chain leadership, we're not only saying, oh, you have some bad connections over here. It's, here's specific reasons for this one, that one. Here's a bigger one. Here's a smaller one. Here's one that may impact your digital transformation or automation and Industry 4.0 initiatives. So by bringing this understanding, unsiloing the data, and delivering it kind of on a silver platter for action is how we can help this problem.
Well, the more technology we see, the more innovations we see, the more connections we need, and the more threat of those connections not being optimum. And so I really appreciate, Shari, you're taking the time to talk about this critical issue and a little bit about Connect as well. So Shari Christofferson of Connect, thank you for your time. Do appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob.